And today we're going to be talking about the discussion question help guide. So I just want to say first, hold on, let me get a drink real quick. I just want to say first that this is just an optional guide. You don't have to do any of the steps in it. I'm literally just doing this as a help, like for you to see how I'm working through discussion questions in my head. So when you click on this document, this is what's going to pop up. It's going to be a discussion question help guide. It's going to show you how I break down questions and answer them. Then it's going to show you a kind of a detailed or longer walkthrough of how I do it, of me answering a question for chapter 1. And then it's going to show you a more simplified version of me answering a question from chapter 2. All right, so here's the process. Whenever you want to answer a question, I want you to do 2 things. I want you to first brainstorm, kind of get it all situated in your head, and then come up with your answer. So to effectively brainstorm, what I always do is I read the question and I highlight and define any important concepts, terminology. I also maybe like underline or pay attention to any like directional kind of cues or kind of details that are listed, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I go and I define them, like look at the terms, read the textbook, see what it means first. Then I go and I translate, meaning that I kind of like, after I read them in my own word, or I read the definition of the book, I say it in my own words so I can fully grasp it. So a lot of times, you know, if you remember growing up, I know I did this. When I had like a definition quiz at school, I went and I would have to read it word for word and try to define it word for word. And that's not what, really is applicable to everyday life, right? We don't ever say things exactly like a textbook or a dictionary. Like if a kid came up to you and said, hey, so-and-so, what does love mean? You wouldn't give them the definition from the dictionary. You would describe it in your own words and possibly give an example, right? Like you might say, oh, love is an emotion or a feeling that we feel towards someone or something, like your stuffed animal, you love hugging it, it makes you feel safe at night. That's love. So that would be you describing it and defining it for them. So that's going to be the second step, right? After you look at the textbook definition of the term or concept, you're going to define it in your own words and think of an example that illustrates it. Right, so then the last thing you're going to do is after you do that, you're going to go back and you're going to reread the question or review, meaning you're going to reread it, and I bet you're going to much better understand the question afterwards. You're going to read it and make sure you pay attention to if there's any other follow-up questions or other details you need to pay attention to. All right, so that is your brainstorming process. Then you are going to do your claim, evidence, and warrant to answer the question. So claim, evidence, and warrant is like, if you ever watch law shows, I mean, they do this all the time, but basically, and like in a law show, what they would do is they go and, like they state a claim, right? So there's a person that's guilty and they're like, they're guilty for this reason. Well, they can't just say that and the jury say, okay, fine. Like they have to produce evidence. So they bring evidence to the table, and then at the end, they sum it all up, they wrap it all up, and they're like, okay, all of this evidence proves that so-and-so is guilty. That's kind of what you're doing here. So when I answer questions, I always think of it this way. Like I state my claim, meaning I give my answer. Like I actually just answer the question fully, okay? Answer the question. And then I provide evidence. My evidence for this particular, like for discussion questions, is that example you thought of. Remember when you were translating it in your own words and you thought of an example? I then talk about an example that illustrates the claim that I just said, right? So whatever my answer is, I then talk about an example. I describe it. And then I summarize everything up and I kind of connect that evidence back to my answer and my claim, meaning I just tell why that particular example illustrated my answer, right? And then you'll notice there's one more warrant. That part's optional. That's there in case there's like an extra part to the discussion question. Some of them kind of have a little follow-up. Like there's like a big portion of the discussion question, then there might be like a small follow-up question. That's kind of just reserved for that if you need it. Okay, so when you go through this, I kind of just do that for you here. So you'll see in this chapter 1 discussion question example and detailed walkthrough. Basically, if I was doing this, the first thing I would do is I would read through that question. I would highlight all the terms. I would underline or bold anything important. So for me, I would say, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm just going to show you how I would do this section. So I would like probably bold outgoing individual because that seems kind of important. All right, it's kind of detailed, you know, I feel like the teacher wants me to pay attention to that. The next thing I would highlight is communication apprehension because that sounds very much like a term. Then context, because that sounds like a term. And communication communication competence also sounds like a term. Okay, so then I would read the last question. Any steps they can do? So steps, she's not saying, and the teacher's not saying didn't tell me the concept that they're talking about, but the steps makes me think you're talking about a concept or you're wanting me to find something else in the chapter. So I'm going to bold and underline that. All right, so after I did this, I would go and I would read all the definitions of these words and then also maybe try to find whatever those steps are talking about. So you can see below, I have them all defined for you. Communication apprehension is actually a concept, not just a term. It's kind of bigger. Context is kind of bigger too, but I mean, the concept here is the communication apprehension. I won't read all that, but you can read it. I just wrote out literally all like what it says in the textbook. Did the same for context, did the same for communication competence. Then I translated in my own words. So I said it all in my own words, and you can tell this is so much shorter, right, than the other more detailed ones. And then I thought of my example that I would like to use for my answer. And then I went back and I made sure that I figured out, okay, now steps. What is she talking about there? I went through the chapter and I found two things that were the steps for, and like in this question it says, for decreasing apprehension. So I found decreasing apprehension. I paid attention to that. I went and I found social ease. There's a word terminology here that was talking about lowering that apprehension. And then here, communication improvement plan. Those are the steps that the teacher's talking about. So included it there. I brainstormed. I've got it all together. So now I answer my question. So here you see it kind of broken into different parts. You do not have to do it like that for the discussion question you post. You'll just write it in paragraph form. But I go through, I break up all my information that I just found in claim, evidence, and warrant sections. I did use the second warrant because there was an extra part to the question. Then I wrote my answer. There's my full, complete answer. So I would say an answer should look about this long. A little shorter is totally fine too, especially if you don't have two warrants, right? So that might be the case for you, but that's there for you. All right, so now let's look at this simplified one. So again, I answered the question, or I went through the question. I would have highlighted and underlined anything important, right? My brainstorming part. I then translate in my own words, think of my example. Then I review, make sure I got all the other portions and I find any other terms that I need to or anything else that Ms. Peters wants me to look for. That's the review. Then I think of my claim, I think of my evidence and my warrant, and then if I need another warrant. So again, you could read this on your own time, but you can see, again, claim, evidence, warrant, right? So again, I write a little longer, I'm more detailed, yes. This is what I hope you can get to by the end of the semester. If, at the beginning, you're kind of struggling with this, that's okay. Don't beat yourself up, you'll figure it out. Just keep on going and that'll be great. I mean, this is really all I want. So use this to your advantage. If it doesn't help you, then, disregard it. But that's really what I'm looking for. And I hope that this is kind of something that can help you the rest of your college career.